There's nothing quite like yelling, "Don't go in there," and then tilting the analog stick to, in fact, make them go in there. Hey, it's Game Rant, and here are the 10 best third-person horror games ranked. Number 10. Tormented Souls. So here's a heck of a way to start off our list, a surprise, and a modern surprise at that. In fact, this entire list might be a wake-up call to players of a, certain age. Survival horror and third-person games have come a long way since the days of Alone in the Dark. Even with all those criticisms of plot-convenient puzzles and convoluted inventory systems were sorely missed. Tormented Souls firmly rejects the modern trend of horror games, keeping many of the clumsy mechanics with refined production, including the greatest offender, fixed perspective cameras. So if you are of that certain age, or you can appreciate games that debuted on a compact disc, Tormented Souls will hit a sweet spot like no other on this list. Number 9. The Evil Within. See, this is another surprise for those of us educated in the digital undead. The Evil Within franchise seems destined to ever stay a duology now that studio Tango Gameworks has been shuttered by Microsoft. Good call on that, by the way, Billy Gates. Way to steer Microsoft back to profitability. Who needs a unique and brilliant collection of developers and artists creating some of the finest games of the recent generation? And at one point, we may have bickered about which Evil Within to include, as its sequel is equally acclaimed. But now that we know we'll never get any more, yeah, play them both. The first game is absolutely flawed with a perplexing art direction of forced widescreen in the era of widescreen televisions, and the artificial feeling of a game within a game. To date, it is the final work of Shinji Mikami, and it's likely the last we'll ever see of his directorial work. Is it fun? So we're talking about an auteur here. Choices were made, and if you can appreciate this perspective, you owe it to yourself to discover The Evil Within. And its sequel. Still got in there. Number 8. Fatal Frame 2: Crimson Butterfly. The early to mid-2000s were an incredible convergence of events, cultures, and technology, such as the way genuine Japanese directors and their films were treated with reverence by the West. For a while there, we all wanted to import our fears to distract us from, there was a lot going on at the time. So Fatal Frame 2: Crimson Butterfly had a lot to do, and boy did it ever. First off, your two little twin girls, a classic horror trope completely flipped. Or is it? See, this is a Japanese game through and through, and many of its intended references will go right over those of us submerged in our own unique spiritual references. So instead, they just make the game absolutely horrific to look at. These aren't dated visuals. This is a creative choice to make something deeper than scary. It's sad. Oh, and you use a magic camera to make the ghosts go away. Look, you say it out loud, yeah, it's a little silly. But that's what makes the Fatal Frame series so special. It's like a nightmare. It doesn't survive logic, but few games can match this texture. Number 7. Alan Wake 2. It's hard to believe, but there was once a time when it felt like the first Alan Wake would never release, despite appearing at multiple trade shows. But between one weird spin-off, Remedy Games moving on to other projects like Control, and, no longer working with Microsoft, it seemed any real conclusion to Alan Wake beyond an extended universe was remote. Or it would be for any other studio than Remedy Games, who released a shocking classic numbered sequel, renowned for its absolute stunning current-gen lighting and graphics. You will believe a man's hair can get a little damp sometimes. Whoa. The thing about Alan Wake 2 is that the media is all too eager to spoil all of the cutscenes and their unusual directions. And while we won't ruin the general experience of a Stephen King-like author battling his own creations, there's some genuinely good comedy here. Alan Wake 2 will make you jump, but really, that's only where it starts. So get those batteries ready. Number 6. Dead Space. It's hard to get excited for reboots the more common they become, as they simply bring down the medium. Alright, that's enough math now. Put away your calculators and instead get ready to experience an interactive panic attack in space. After all, the first Dead Space developer Visceral Games were pushed into more action-driven direction by the end of their existence. And then what happened? Oh, that's right, they were shuttered by EA. So what exactly could this new Dead Space be but an utter cash grab for aging Gen Z kids? Well, in a surprising turn, Dead Space is one of the best third-person horror games ever. See? It's on the list. No one expected Isaac Clarke's return to the USG Ishimura to be this rich in terror, but also depth. We're talking about a franchise that went from trying to scare moms to the reboot featuring a complex paternal relationship forever damaged by theology. Okay, so we're not going the commercial route, are we? Oh, we aren't done. The crude instruments left over will hurt the necromorphs in some rather disturbing ways. Whoops, that means the Japanese rating board will decline the game altogether. Why did EA make this? Who knows? But we're happy they did. Number 5. Silent Hill 2. Some things never change. With the Silent Hill 2 reboot from Bloober Team, we once again feel merely outlining the plot details would be boring to those familiar with the original and a potential spoiler for the upcoming remake. We remember what happened with Final Fantasy VII, and we're not dealing with that again. Silent Hill 2 is a game which was criticized for the strangest reasons when it was released, such as its clumsy combat and confusing plot. But we really must emphasize, a lot of what makes a horror game great isn't something you like or dislike, it's that it needs a grounding in reality, even in space or with magic cameras. Otherwise, there's nothing to gain. These are creative decisions, not mistakes. Team Silent was an endlessly creative studio, taking all of the limits of the PlayStation 2 and creating gorgeous 3D models in a dreamlike journey of the lies we tell ourselves. But again, that's far too limited a description, and exactly the reason this game has been consistently praised for over 2 decades. Number 4. Resident Evil 2. The original Resident Evil remake, yes, we're just focusing on the remakes today, launched 6 years after the first game. So fans assumed a remake of Resident Evil 2 would appear sometime around 2004. Nice math again, guys, but please, put away those darn calculators. Besides, you're wrong. Capcom decided the perfect time to release this remake would be 2019. Why is that? Oh, I bet the mysterious Wesker is involved, right fans? Well, perhaps this was always a make-good plan just in case the radical redesign of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard with its first-person perspective didn't pan out. Or perhaps Capcom was on yet another one of their magical runs where everything they touch is gold. Oh, who are we kidding? They're still on that. A perfect one-to-one location-to-location remake with some of the finest HDR effects to this day. Some would say it's the very best Resident Evil remake so far, and it almost makes up for Umbrella Corps, but nah. Number 3. Resident Evil 4. The original Resident Evil 4 was yet another magnum opus from the aforementioned Shinji Mikami. Forever shall he reign. Except he didn't make this game. His game was a slow burn and release of tension. This remake sees that slow burn and dumps gasoline all over it before dumping it on itself and chasing after you with a chainsaw. The point of this clumsy metaphor is the first game is far less action-driven than some give it credit for, while this remake leans hard into the fast-paced action and reaction combos to quickly eliminate the Las Plagas victims. So it's worse, right? Well, that's the funny thing. This game is not beholden to the tradition of a game best known for breaking tradition. It's an explosive action game that contains many, many gross things Liam will have to end. Let's underline this one like we did with Evil Within and recommend you diehards play both. But this remake is worthy of the title Resident Evil 4, and it almost makes up for Umbrella Corps. But again, nope. Number 2. The Last of Us Part 2. Boy, team, do we sure love the task of defending The Last of Us Part 2. Look, it's a divisive game, but as they say in Helldivers 2, democracy and all that, and when we look at the modern third-person horror scenarios, it's honestly difficult to compete with Naughty Dog's The Last of Us Part 2, a complex allegory of revenge, but not in the traditional game sense. You won't be Mega Manning your way through bosses to collect all the Power Stones and turn into Supersonic. This is a realistic look at those who exist to enact revenge. It's rarely glamorous and lingers without purpose quite often, but isn't that what obsession does to a person? Locking themselves away from the people around them and reality itself, but by the time you're facing a rat king in a sewer, you may want to ask yourself, why are you doing this? But unfortunately, we the audience are left to ask those questions, as the characters we love outgrow a convenient or plain narrative to make poor decisions on their own. The Last of Us Part 2 might work for you, or it might not, but much like other great works, we do recommend it on a gameplay and academic level. Number 1. The Last of Us. Real talk, it's definitely not cool to call The Last of Us the best third-person horror game. We know some will roll their eyes at this answer, but again, taken as a third-person horror game, it is undeniable how successful The Last of Us is as a piece of art. It shows what becomes of lingering humanity after a zombie virus destroys the world. Oh, we're sorry, what was that? Cordyceps and fungus aren't zombies? Alright, we'll admit that Naughty Dog came up with a rather grounded scenario for its zombie game, but are we supposed to pretend this isn't a zombie game? Because it's a zombie game. I mean, sure, we can see the difference in terms of intellectual property. Maybe old George Romero forgot to copyright, but Naughty Dog, well, they're not going to make those same mistakes. But we're here to say, no matter what the marketing and lore would have you believe, we know what we see, and The Last of Us is one heck of a good zombie game. So while Sony might pretend The Last of Us is too important to be survival horror, we call foul. If you like The Last of Us, you're a survival horror fan. And if you're a survival horror fan, you should definitely play The Last of Us. We'd go so far as to say it's the best third-person horror game ever. Anyway, that's going to do it for this list, but how about telling us what is the single best third-person horror game in your opinion, and we'll take a look at those comments later on. So keep clicking around here in Game Rant, and we'll see you next time.